This morning's text is from Acts chapter 27, verses 19 through 26. And on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all, those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Our kids can be dismissed up through 5th grade. There's great things down the hall for them. To the rest of you, thank you so much for being here at Community Christian Church today. Here's the way we start out. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm, smile at the storm, smile at the storm. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm until he leads me home. Sailing, sailing home, sailing, sailing home. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm until he leads me home. We're at the tail end of our journey through the book of Acts, and these last chapters we've waded through could rightly be their own book, just titled this, The Problems of Paul, okay? Because from chapter 21 on, we've just seen one bad thing after another happen to Paul, and then in chapter 27, where we are today, that it's no different. In our text, he's on a ship. He is heading to Rome, and the ship gets caught in a storm. Now, if you've been with us, there were some false accusations way back in the beginning of this story in Jerusalem that led to Paul being questioned and put on trial 4.5 different times, like literally. And in that process, along the way, he appealed to Caesar. And what that means is that he wanted to exercise his full rights as a Roman citizen and be tried in Rome. And so he knew he couldn't get a fair trial anywhere around Judea. And on top of all of that, his life was in danger and people wanted to kill him. And so none of the charges that they had against him had stuck. And he knew that the Roman authorities could release him. And if they had released him, he would have been an easy target for people to execute him. And so he appeals to Rome. And now he is on his way. He's on a ship. He's with sailors. He's with soldiers. And the Roman soldiers are running the ship. And they have Paul in custody. And they are transporting him to Rome. And even in this scenario, it seems like maybe finally things are shaping up the way that God promised Paul that they would. Like that he's going to have the opportunity to preach the gospel in Rome. And it's all coming together. And then a storm. It hits. Luke calls it a tempestuous wind. The word is the word from which we get typhoon. And so this is basically a hurricane that happens. And the ship is going through a hurricane. The storm is so violent and persists so long that Luke says neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. Some people would say like 14 days even. The storm just continues to rage so that everyone on board begins to fear for their lives. Luke writes of this desperation. He says, all our hope of being saved was at last abandoned. And here's the way we tackle this event in chapter 27 today. The storm is another piece of Paul's suffering. It's another problem that has come his way, and it's a picture of all suffering. When something bad comes into your life, lots of times you'll refer to it as a storm. And here Paul has a real physical storm, but it speaks to all the hardships that come into our life that we metaphorically call storms. And so if we look at this text and we see how Paul deals with his storm, it will teach us about how we can deal with our own. First, let me point to you a little puzzle that we have here in the text. When all hope is lost on the ship, Paul stands up and he begins to take charge. And here's a prisoner that's being transferred to another place, another jurisdiction, but the prisoner takes charge to restore hope. That's amazing. The unencumbered people on the boat had only despair, but the guy confined to the boat had hope to share. Go figure. How's that work? Paul stands up. The first thing he says is, "I told you so." Like apparently, he lent his prisonerly advice to the sailors along the way about the route that they should take, and they summarily dismissed it, like all professional sailors probably should, right? But he says, "You should have listened to me. We wouldn't be here right now." And then he says, "But keep up your courage." And here's why. "Last night an angel of God visited me and told me not one of you will die. We are going to lose the ship. We can't avoid that, but not one of you will be lost." And Paul had been given this prophecy by God himself. An angel of the Lord came to him and said that he would get to Rome and that no one on the ship would be lost. We're going to have to run the ship aground, but you guys will live. That's what he's telling them. I want you to keep that in your mind. Then I want to skip down to verse 30 and 31. Sometime later, there is so much fear among the sailors that they actually attempt to escape the ship. Here are the people running the ship, sailing the ship, and they want off. They covertly decide to let down the lifeboat and take off. And Paul discovers what they're doing, and he goes to the centurion in charge, and he says, "Hey, if they leave, then what I told you, it's all off. If they leave, you'll die. The only way we all live is if they stay on this boat. Like, we're just a prisoner. We're just some soldiers here. We are not trained sailors. They are the trained sailors. If they're not here to sail the ship, then we lose. We have to stay. They have to stay." And so the centurion has his soldiers go and actually cut the ropes to the lifeboat so that it drops into the sea and it drifts away, and they let it go. And aside from the fact that the centurion in charge is taking commands from his prisoner, like that's amazing, right? Here's what I want you to see. Paul's dream, Paul's prophecy, Paul's word from God promised that no one would die on one hand. God has spoken. You will survive this storm. But then on the other hand, Paul says, unless these sailors stay with the boat, we cannot be saved. Do you see the problem there? If God has determined that everyone will live, and Paul here knows what it means to put the weight of God behind his words. He knows the Old Testament. If a prophet says God says, but God didn't ever say, then the prophet's punishment is death. Paul knows that. But he says, God says, everyone will live. Okay, if that's true, then why does it matter if the sailors stay on the boat or desert the boat? Why does Paul care? If God has spoken, then Paul could have said to the sailors, "Go ahead, take a leap. It doesn't matter. Have fun snorkeling out there. It's fine. What will happen is fixed, and God said you won't die." But he doesn't do that. He knows that what they do matters. They have to sail the boat, and so he doesn't let them leave the boat. Now, what does that tell us? One of the traps we get caught up in is that we believe if God is totally in charge, if he's totally in control of the world and of our lives, and we do believe this, yes? Yeah? If he speaks and says, "It is decided," then we think it no longer matters what I do. That's the trap. And we do the either-or game. Either God is in control and it doesn't matter what I do, or God is not in control and all that matters is what I do. Well, what if it's not either or? What if the text is telling us that it's both and? What if God is in control of every single thing that happens in life, and yet our choices are also things that absolutely matter? They still have consequences. We are free to choose and very responsible for what we do choose. What if God holds both of those truths together at once? And so it's not God is 100% in charge and I'm 0% responsible, or God is 0% in charge and I'm 100% responsible, or even 50-50 or 80-20 or anything like that. What if, as Paul shows us here, God is 100% in charge, and yet at the very same time, I am 100% responsible for what I do? We can just flip back a few pages in the same book and get a supreme example of this idea. Peter is preaching the very first sermon on the first Sunday of the church in Acts chapter 2, and he throws out this same puzzle, except just on an infinitely greater level. In Acts chapter 2, he says this Jesus was delivered up according to a plan. Whose plan was it? Can you see there? It was God's plan. God's determined plan. God thought it up. He planned it all. He ordained it to happen. God said, this is what will be, and it was. And yet, look at the last half of the line. He says, you, meaning the people that he's preaching to, you used lawless people to nail Jesus to a cross and kill him, meaning you people and the choices you made are responsible for Jesus hanging on a cross. So it was God's plan, it was the choice of the people. Yes, God ordains exactly what he wants through our free choices that we are absolutely responsible for. 100% God, 100% me. And that's a puzzle. But I want you to listen. When the storm comes, that idea is going to help you when it does. It's the most practical thing in the world when the winds start blowing and blowing your ship all over the sea. Here's why. When I know that my choices matter, then I can't be passive in the storm. Paul isn't passive here. He's poised, he's assertive, he's calm, he takes charge. Why? Because he knows his actions matter. There will be consequences for what he does do and what he doesn't do. When storms come, I have to summon up all of the wisdom and strength that God has afforded me, and I have to live the best way I can. My choices matter. On the other hand, when I also know that God is 100% in control, it's so comforting. It's so consoling to me. Here's why. Because God's plan always stays God's plan. I can't mess up his plan. I can't. I really can't break my world or my future, because despite my successes, despite my failures, God's plan is still going to win in the end. And when we hold both of those things together, what I do matters, and God has a plan, then we can handle the storms with poise, with calm, with assurance that in our actions, God is writing a story that will be the best one for us in the end. Now that leads to the second point, and that is the point of storms. That's the question we all have, right? When we start opening this subject of suffering up, we say, why? That's the question. Why would God allow this? Why in the world is this bad thing happening to me? I'm sure Paul had that question on the ship in the middle of a storm. It would have been barely even a consolation for Paul and all the people on this boat, and it's really something that you don't see much, we wouldn't see much consolation in either. But do you realize that in keeping a hand on the rudder, even through the storm and surviving the storm, the strong winds of that storm actually pushed Paul and his traveling buddies further and faster to their destination than clear skies would have? It's true. Often, when the storm is over, you're actually better off. You're actually closer to where you should be. It's also true that that's not much consolation, but it should be. It gets us into what Scripture tells us about suffering and the point of suffering. Every storm that comes into your life is ultimately, here it is, for your good. For your good. A guy named Jacob has 12 sons in the Old Testament. His favorite son is a guy named Joseph. Jacob doesn't hold back in showing all the other sons that he has that he loves Joseph the most. He spoils Joseph, and it absolutely wrecks the family. Joseph becomes this brat, this amazing brat, and his brothers are bitter and angry. And so the brothers one day get their chance to take care of daddy's favorite forever, and they sell Joseph into slavery. Joseph becomes a slave in Egypt. He grows up a bit, he works hard, he does what is right, even though he's a slave, but every righteous thing that he does turns bad. And he's finally even thrown into prison for doing the right thing. And bad thing after bad thing in his life comes. Storm after storm comes to Joseph. And when this happens, the conclusion that you might have is that God is not listening at all. But if you've read the story, you know that God was in charge the whole way. It's only because he's in prison that Joseph meets the people and does the things that he needs to do in order to ascend and become one of the most powerful men in all of Egypt. And as that powerful man, he saves Egypt from starvation. He even saves his own brothers from starvation. And the lesson is that if all the bad things hadn't happened, then none of the good things would have happened. And at the very end of the story, Joseph's family is all together with him in Egypt, and his father, Jacob, dies, and his brothers get nervous. Because here it comes, right? Like with dad not here finally, Joseph is finally going to want to get his revenge on us for what we did to him. And they come to him, and they beg and they plead for forgiveness and mercy. And what will Joseph say to his brothers that sold him into slavery? Here's what Genesis 50 says. He says, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for," what's the word? Good. To bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now, if that sounds vaguely familiar, then it's probably because you've heard that line put a slightly different way as Paul writes it in the New Testament in Romans chapter 8. He says this, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for," what's the word? Good. "For those who are called according to his purpose." All things work together for good. It doesn't say everything is good that will come into your life. But it does say that from the perspective of heaven, that, by the way, only God has right now, that when we get there, we'll be able to look back over the course of all the things that happens in our lives, all the tragedies, even all the disasters, all the horrible things, and we'll be able to see that God has very carefully worked everything out, even evil things, to accomplish the exact opposite of what the evil intended to accomplish. We may not see it in this life. Joseph is able to look back over his life and see it. We not be able to see it until we get to heaven, maybe not. But he's working all things together so that even the worst things end up bringing about the best things. You meant it for evil, but God is using the evil to bring about the very opposite of what evil intended. That's God's purpose in all storms. I said all storms, not just your storm. All storms. In all storms, he's working for your good. I want you to take Job. Do you know Job's story? Do you know that Job's suffering was for you? That's crazy. Job is a hard book. It's too long and too much poetry for us, so that we barely make it through it, right? But Job is a good guy, and Satan comes to God and says, "Let me have a crack at Job. Let me take some things away from Job, and let's see how good a guy he really is. I don't think he's such a good guy." And God says, "Okay, have at it." And Satan goes to Job, and he takes stuff away from Job, but Job stays faithful to God. Satan goes back to God, "Let me take more stuff, and it will reveal finally that he really doesn't love you." And God says, "Do your worst." And so Satan this time takes Job's family, like wipes them out. And it messes with us that God would allow Satan to do this. But flip to the end of the book. And in the end, we find that God has given Satan just enough rope to hang himself. Because here's what happens. In the end, what Satan helps bring about is one of the greatest books in the history of the world about how to navigate suffering. It's helped millions and millions of people be faithful to God when bad things happen to them. And so I want you to think about that. God let Satan, he let evil intend one thing. What did he intend? To take one man away from God, one man. And not only did he not accomplish that, but because of Job's story, untold millions of people have been able to stay faithful to God during their hardships. And so evil intended one thing, but God overpowered and accomplished the exact opposite. Or better, take Jesus. You know Jesus' suffering was for you. I hope you do. We look at Jesus and all the amazing, miraculous things he did for suffering people. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He made lepers well. He gives sight to the blind. He's feeding the hungry. There's so many things that he did to make the world right for just a minute, right? And if you think about it, in the year or two before Jesus died, Jesus had done so many miracles that it would be hard to think that there was any disease at all in Palestine during that time. But at the end, he's hanging on a cross. And here he is. He's helped so many other people, but he's subject to suffering himself, and his closest friends and even his mother are watching this. And they're thinking, this? Why this? Like, what in the world are you doing, God? There's no way there's any sense to this, to the cross. Now, you and I know the story. We know all the horrible things that were happening to Jesus at the cross. We know of the anger of the religious authorities and the sin of the world and the fury of Satan and evil that were being thrown on Jesus' shoulders at the cross. What did evil want at the cross? It wanted to kill God, and it wanted to kill us. But what did it accomplish? The exact opposite. Jesus came out alive. We came out with a path to life. The salvation of the world was accomplished at the cross. See, you've heard people, maybe you've heard yourself say, God, I reject you. Because you let my mom die, because you let my brother die, because you let somebody close to me in my life die. Why don't we say that about God? God, I reject you because you let Jesus die. I can't acknowledge a God who would let his own son die, all the good he did, and just to have him die on a cross. I can't trust a God like that. Why don't we say that? We say it about the people we love. Why not about Jesus? Here's why. It's because we know without a doubt why God let Jesus die. We know the why, right? It was to turn the intentions of evil around for good. It was for my atonement. It was for my redemption. It was for my resurrection. If you hear the gospel, then you'll understand why God allowed all those storms to come for Jesus. But what we don't know is why God is allowing my storm. That's why we question. And the help here is to see all of the storms that he's allowed for all of these other people, and to see every time, they were for good. The storm is always for good. For Joseph, it was for good. For Job, it was for good. For Jesus, it was for good. So now I can trust that even when I don't know the reason, the suffering God allows in my life is also coming for my good. God is working, and he's exercising his power over history so that whatever evil intends, it will end up backfiring, and God will overrule it and bring about the exact opposite of what evil intended. The reason that you're in the storm is good, even if you can't see it yet. It's good. One more to end. Presence. In the storms of life, we can have the presence of God. When Paul tells everyone on the ship at the very first that God speaks to him, he says it this way. He says, last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong, and to whom I worship, stood before me. I want you to note that phrase, the God to whom I belong. Paul is hinting at the covenant relationship that we all get to have with God because of Jesus. God says this very often, especially in the Old Testament. You will be my people, and I will be your God. There are only a very few relationships in this life where you speak like that. Like, I have a really good relationship with a lot of you, okay? But I'm not the point where I can say, oh, my Dave. Oh, my Sharon. Oh, my Chad. No, not doing that. Sorry. But it has to be somebody closer to me, right? My Amy, my Delynn, my Max, my Arlie, my Drake. I'm not sure that my son-in-law Tony even makes my list, right? My is reserved for the closest relationships. And here, Paul, in the middle of the storm, he's able to say, my God. My God. I know I'm his. He is mine. He loves me. He's committed to me. And the mistake we often make in suffering is one of two extremes. Again, on one hand, we can think that God is punishing us, and we despair. On the other hand, we think that God is absent, and he doesn't care, and that's why we're suffering, and the same result happens. We despair. But Paul says neither of those here. He doesn't say he's had it with me. He doesn't say he's absent from me. He says he is with me. He stood by me. My God came and stood by me. And because he knows God is with him and he knows that God is for his good, then he has concluded that the storm will only make him better in the end. Now, how does he know that? How can you really know when bad things happen to you that God isn't giving up on you, or that God isn't through with you because he's had it with you? How can you know? Here's how. Jesus in Matthew chapter 12 talks about Jonah. Jonah's another guy in the Bible that got caught in a storm. Do you remember? He gets thrown overboard. He ends up in the belly of a great fish, and he's there 3 days. And Jesus says, just like Jonah, the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days. And he says, a greater Jonah is now here. And he was speaking about himself. He was saying, I am the greater Jonah, the true Jonah. Well, what happened to Jonah? God told Jonah to preach to a certain group of people, but Jonah didn't want to do it. And so he sailed the opposite direction to get away from God's mission for him. And so God sent a storm. It was a storm of God's wrath. And when Jonah sees the storm, he knows it's for him. He knows that it's not only for him, but he deserves it. And he doesn't want anybody else to die with him. And so he says to all the sailors on the ship in the middle of the storm, throw me overboard. Let the storm do its worst to me, and you will be saved. And so do you see, when Jesus says, I am the ultimate Jonah, what's he saying? He's saying there's a storm that God is sending. And it's coming for you, and you deserve it, and you know it. You've sinned, you've run from God, you've failed to live rightly, and you deserve the storm of God's wrath. But Jesus steps in, and he says, throw me into the storm instead. I will take the wind, I will take the waves of sin for you, I will be consumed by God's wrath, I will take the suffering and be abandoned by God, even on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? I'll be abandoned on the cross by God so that you never will have to be. I'll take the suffering you deserved. And now whenever you suffer, you'll know it's not punishment because I've taken it. I've taken the punishment. And you'll know it's not God leaving you because he left me instead so that he will never leave you. And God will now be with you in your pain and will bring you out on the other side. Something that you learn in the hospital room or in the funeral home is that people in those spaces aren't really after theology. I usually don't get, Dusty, I'm dying here, give me your take on Arminianism. Doesn't happen. In fact, we should all learn this. People in their storms of life really don't expect us to say much of anything. They just need us to be there. They just need us to be with them. How are you going to get through your storm? With. That's how. That's how. And the good news today is, of all the religions and the philosophies of the world, only Christianity has a God who has chosen to be with us in our suffering. Christianity is the only way that even claims that God would stoop to suffering, but he has, and it makes him like no other because he is with us. Have you been betrayed by a friend? So has God. Have you had pain in your body? So has God. Have you been mistreated? So has God. Have you been rejected? So has God. Are you facing death? So has God. Have you lost a child? So has God. He really is with you in whatever storm is blowing because he's faced it too, and he is there. And if he's your God, and if he's there, then the pain that you experience, the storms that come in, are just part of a broken world that God still controls and controls to eventually bring about your good. Sing it with me. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm, smile at the storm, smile at the storm. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm until he leads me home. Sailing, sailing home, sailing, sailing home. With Christ as my vessel, I can smile at the storm until he leads me home. God, when bad things come into our lives, we need this text because it helps us make a little sense of the suffering that we encounter. But more than that, it reminds us of the God who is with us, who loves us, and who is working always, even in the evils of the world, to bring our good. Help us to see the suffering of Jesus and to trust that this is true. And it's in the name of the God who went through the storm for us, the greater Jonah. It's in the name of Jesus we pray and trust and give thanks. And all the people said.